Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Wednesday, January 24th, 2024. This is the Excerpt. Today, Trump wins in New Hampshire. What's next for the Republican presidential race going forward? Plus, the Doomsday Clock remains close to midnight, and we take a look at the Academy Award nominations. Former President Donald Trump defeated former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in the New Hampshire Republican presidential primary last night. The primary has long shown the power to make or break candidates. All eyes were on Haley to see if she could close the gap on Trump, the frontrunner, but he won overwhelmingly by at least 10 percentage points.
This is not your typical victory speech, but let's not have somebody take a victory when she had a very bad night.
Haley, though, said she's not going anywhere.
New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation.
To help put the night in context and set the stage for what happens next, I spoke with USA Today White House correspondent Francesca Chambers. Francesca, thanks for hopping on after a busy primary night.
Thanks so much for having me.
So the first in the nation New Hampshire primary is in the books. And Francesca, as many polls predicted, it was a win for Donald Trump. What was the night's biggest takeaway?
By the time that Nikki Haley's party was wrapping up, it was pretty clear that independents, who she had needed to come out and vote for her, did do that. But it just wasn't enough to make up the difference against Donald Trump in this state. But registered Republicans came out for Donald Trump, and by large margin.
You know, polling showed Nikki Haley trailing Donald Trump coming into the night. What might these results mean for the Haley campaign going forward?
Haley has about a month until the South Carolina primary to try to catch up to Donald Trump. But one strategist I was talking to said that a key question for her moving forward will be, will the donations dry up? If donors no longer fund her campaign, then she would no longer be able to compete in South Carolina, and potentially she wouldn't have the money to go into Super Tuesday.
Francesca, some of the conversation has already shifted to who Donald Trump might select as running mate if he wins the Republican nomination. What did tonight's results mean for those questions?
Well, even before tonight, Taylor, Trump was saying they didn't want Nikki Haley to be his running mate. And some of the people who were interested came out to New Hampshire to campaign for him. They include South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who was once in the campaign but has since endorsed Donald Trump, as well as Elise Stefanik, a member of the House GOP leadership, who came to the state to campaign for him too.
On the Democratic side, there was a grassroots campaign to write in President Joe Biden on the ticket. To remind our listeners, Biden did not register for the primary after a ballot dispute. What did we learn here, and how did he fare on the night?
Well, it was a loosely organized effort that the Biden campaign couldn't be involved in without being punished by the DNC. So volunteers came out to the polls on Tuesday holding write-in Joe Biden signs with their stickers, and they asked people to put his name on the ballot. And in the end, it proved successful, and he was able to come to a victory in New Hampshire.
So, Francesca, we know Nevada and South Carolina are coming up next on the calendar. Nevada has a caucus, and Haley is not competing in that. But South Carolina is a primary as well as Haley's home state, and clearly a focus for her. What can we expect from these states after New Hampshire results?
Nikki Haley is headed home to South Carolina, which has its Republican primary on February 24th. So she has a long runway between now and then to campaign in the state. She's not competing in the Nevada caucus that's taking place. That's a state that's expected to go to former President Donald Trump. Haley will instead spend the entire month focusing on South Carolina, assuming she stays in the race.
Francesca Chambers, great insight from primary night in New Hampshire. Thanks, Francesca.
Anytime.
You can read more from New Hampshire on usatoday.com. While many of us in the news media in the U.S. have been focused on New Hampshire since yesterday morning, there have been some major developments overseas. For starters, the U.S. launched strikes on Iran-backed militias yesterday in Iraq. The move came after a base hosting American troops was attacked by ballistic missiles last week, wounding 4 American service members. The strikes are significant because they targeted Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps assets, according to a U.S. official who is not authorized to speak publicly. The Revolutionary Guard Corps plays a key role in Iran's foreign policy, including equipping and training militant groups in the Middle East. Elsewhere, the Israeli military said its forces have encircled the Gazan city of Khan Yunis. And in Gaza, Palestinian militants killed 21 Israeli soldiers on Monday, bringing the total of soldiers killed to at least 217. More than 25,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since an October 7th attack in Israel, when militants killed around 1,200 people and took about 250 hostages. And finally, taking a look around the world, Turkish legislators yesterday endorsed Sweden's membership in NATO. The move lifts a hurdle on the country's acceptance into the military alliance. Ruling party members said Sweden's tougher stance on Kurdish militants was key to winning approval. Amid violence abroad, the experts who maintain the so-called Doomsday Clock said yesterday that humanity is still as close as ever to global catastrophe. The time on the symbolic clock is the same as last year when it was set at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest to midnight it's ever been. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has maintained the clock since 1947. The group was formed in 1945 by University of Chicago scientists who helped develop the first nuclear weapons in the Manhattan Project. The group says the Doomsday Clock is a metaphor for how close humanity is to self-annihilation. The clock remained at the same time as last year due to the continued heightened levels of risk from threats like ongoing wars and out-of-control climate change. And this year, experts also said they were worried about how advancements in artificial intelligence could create chaos and make it harder to prevent global disasters. The nominations for this year's Academy Awards were announced yesterday, and Christopher Nolan's summer hit Oppenheimer led the way with 13 nominations in total. But the other half of the Barbenheimer phenomenon, Barbie, saw a couple of potential snubs, despite a bunch of its own nominations. I caught up with Ralphie Aversa, host of Entertain This, for a full breakdown. Ralphie, thanks for hopping on the Excerpt today.
Thanks, Taylor.
So, Ralphie, the Oscar nominations are out. Lots to sink our teeth into, but let's start with Best Picture. What stood out to you from this category?
There were really no surprises as far as Best Picture is concerned. It was nice to see Barbie get the nod. Of course, Barbie ended up with 8 nominations and a couple of snubs, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. But look, Poor Things, Oppenheimer, which leads everybody, Killers of the Flower Moon, really no surprises as far as Best Picture was concerned.
All right, so let's talk acting. The big news here seems to be, you mentioned the snubs, no nomination for Margot Robbie in Barbie. How big of a surprise was that, Ralphie, and what else made headlines from the acting categories?
Let's just talk Barbie as a whole for a second, because if we talk about just the actress category, the fact of the matter is this was, is, and will be the year of Lily Gladstone. She, of course, the star of Killers of the Flower Moon, alongside Robert De Niro, who was also nominated, and Leonardo DiCaprio, who was not. If you want to put Leo into the snubs, which we did, that's fine, but tomato, I think, as far as Leo's concerned, although his performance was fantastic. Lily, of course, made history, by the way. She is the first Native American actress to be nominated for Best Actress, and I have a feeling she's going to end up winning that Oscar come March 10th. But I say that, first of all, in part to say the Margot Robbie nomination, while it would have been symbolic and earned, it's almost a moot point. However, when you combine the fact that Margot Robbie was not nominated for Best Actress, along with the fact that Greta Gerwig was not nominated for Best Director, along with the fact that Dua Lipa had an incredible song from Barbie, Dance the Night Away. And yes, there's another song from that film, Billie Eilish and Phineas, she co-wrote it with What Was I Made For? That's probably going to win that category for Best Original Song. But when you combine all of those things, Taylor, and then on top of it, Ryan Gosling got a supporting actor nomination. So it's like, wait a minute. We had this whole movie about empowering women and about feminism, and Greta Gerwig doesn't get the nomination. Margot Robbie doesn't get the nomination, but Ryan Gosling does? What? Huh? What? Where did this come from? So it's certainly headlining the snubs chatter, but I think it really has kind of dominated overall all of this Oscar nomination chatter that we've seen over the past 24 hours.
All right, so you mentioned Greta Gerwig, no directing nom for her. It is an interesting mix of names here in the directing category. Scorsese and Christopher Nolan, and then three really talented filmmakers, but maybe folks that blockbuster audiences might not be as aware of as well in here. What stands out from the directing category to you beyond the Greta snub?
For the first time in the 96-year history of the Academy Awards, we have 3 Best Picture nominees directed by women. However, only one of those directors, Justin Triet from Anatomy of a Fall, ended up in that director category. Scorsese, of course, another name there with Killers of the Flower Moon. When I look at the Best Director category, that's the first thing that jumps out.
And Ralphie, as for the show itself, when is it? Who's hosting? And what do we have to look forward to that might be kind of unique this year?
All right, so the show is on ABC again. It's happening March 10th. It's in Hollywood, Dolby Theater. We'll be there, of course. So will Jimmy Kimmel yet again. He's the one who's going to be hosting. Of course, Kimmel found himself in the headlines recently, his back and forth with Aaron Rodgers, who was making comments about him on the Pat McAfee show on ESPN, and Kimmel responding on his show and on X as well, formerly known as Twitter. So it'll be interesting to see if Kimmel takes a dig at Rodgers or perhaps anything else that's happening in the world. This is, after all, an election year. Nonetheless, Jimmy hosting once again the Academy Awards in March.
Ralphie Aversa, thanks so much.
Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the show wherever you get your audio, and if you use a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.